Good afternoon. This is Julie Pavlik of Worldwide ERC. Thanks to everybody for standing by and welcome to today's Worldwide ERC Learning Zone. I would like to take this opportunity to thank today's sponsors, CAP Relo. Today's webinar is entitled Tornadoes, Hurricanes, and Earthquakes. Is your relocation program ready for a natural disaster? Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping announcements. If you are experiencing technical difficulties joining the WebEx session today, please dial 866-779-3239. Email questions may be sent to support@webex.com. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode. If you have a question during the presentation, you may submit it online. To submit your questions, use the Q&A tab located in the lower right-hand portion of your screen. Simply click on the tab and type your question into the dialog box at the bottom of the screen and then click the send button. Also, please note that all written questions selected during this webinar will be answered publicly. We do expect a high volume of questions and will attempt to answer as many as possible. Today's webinar is eligible for 1 CRP credit. If you hold your CRP designation and would like to receive credit for this Learning Zone webinar, you must utilize the recertification credit form, which is available on Worldwide ERC's website in the Certified Relocation Professional section under Education and Training. Now it is my pleasure to introduce today's speakers. Matt Tandy, CRP, is an experienced relocation professional who has worked in all areas of relocation service delivery and risk management since 1998. Matt leads the service team for CAP Relo's portfolio of government clients and is the quality control point for clients and their relocating employees. He was previously responsible for quality control in the area of appraisal management for CAP Relo's portfolio of government and corporate clients. He reviewed and analyzed property appraisals, broker market analysis reports, title work, and home inspection reports. Heather Hudnall, CRP, is a client services manager working with CAP Relo teams to streamline processes and find opportunities for great customer service. Heather has worked closely with transferees administering policy for 5 years. She's knowledgeable on all aspects of relocation benefits, focusing on home sales benefits, destination services, household goods, and various individual needs of transferees and their families. Heather has also been a broker-owner of a real estate company, a member of the National Association of Realtors, and a board member for the local Realtor Association. Next, we have Barbara Miller, CRP, SGMS. She has 35 years experience in the relocation industry. She's held leadership positions in several relocation management companies, including her most recent work as broker and supplier manager, real estate services for a major relocation services company. Barbara's primary responsibility is daily oversight of CAP Relo's inventory management. She is skilled in client development, revenue management, and client implementation. She is a member of the National Association of Realtors, the CRB Council, which is an affiliate of NAR. With that, I would like to welcome our panel of speakers and hand the presentation off to Matt.
Thank you, Julie. As we are all aware, relocating can be one of the most stressful times in a person's life. In the midst of a relocation, a disaster can have an unexpected and profound impact on a transferee, their employee, or their family. Thankfully, large disasters do not happen often. Even so, localized events can affect the transferee or their family, creating havoc for them in the midst of their relocation. Some of these types of events include earthquakes, such as the 1989 earthquake, which took place in the San Francisco Oakland Bay area. Tornadoes, like those that were so devastating last year to Joplin, Missouri, and Tuscaloosa, Alabama. In addition, hurricanes, such as Katrina, are examples of catastrophic damage to areas. Floods can also be localized as well as regional. Fires, like the recent firestorm which hit the Colorado Springs area, as well as many others, including volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, pandemics, terrorist attacks, and nuclear accidents. These types of events can have a significant and unexpected impact on a transferee, their family, and your client, your employee. So if a disaster were to occur, What is your responsibility, and what can you do to help? Before it happens, you can recommend to your transferees and your clients that they develop a plan if they have not already done so, including going to ready.gov website and developing a plan including the necessary information. Then provide a copy to the appropriate people, including information on the immediate family members and relatives, your employer, others that they deem necessary to have that information in case of an emergency. These plans can include names and contact information, medical information, and other specific details which may be needed. In addition, monitoring for occurring or potentially disasters that may be about to occur is very important. In order to be aware of when these are occurring or likely to occur, use all sources available to you, including such mediums as weather communication services, like the Weather Channel, weather.com, as well as local and national news agencies, through television and online like CNN, Fox News, local affiliates as well. In addition, emergency notification and alert systems, and other mediums sources. Also, you'll need to use various means to contact the potentially affected transferees, including email, text messages that can be broadcast to cell phones, as well as telephone calls. However, these telephone calls primarily should be used for contacting transferees that are not in the immediate area of the disaster, but in which the disaster may affect their relocation, such as household goods movements and or their storage, or if they're in a different location, old home versus new home, and they're not present at the place where the disaster is occurring. Then you can verify whether or not the transferee and or the family has been impacted by the disaster, and if assistance is needed. Help determine what services are available through their relocation that can be used to help them, including such things as temporary housing, rental assistance, travel assistance, access to their household goods that may be in storage, any miscellaneous allowance that they may be available to them, and any other benefits that are associated with their relocation. Next, it is important for you that you should alert the client and or clients of the potential and occurring disaster and what impact such event may have or is having on their transferee's relocation, as well as update the information available as to the next steps and the potential time frames that may be coming forward. However, understand that based upon the extent of the damage, it may be some time before a timetable can be determined as to the total impact to the area. Then, use any number of your resources that you have, which could be available to assist, and offer those to your client if they are appropriate, including using additional resources in the area, such as suppliers that you may have, if possible, such as real estate brokers, household goods movers, housing providers, inspectors, appraisers, and any others that you have access to through your contact network. As the primary organization to aid in national and local disasters, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, helps the U.S. to prepare for, protect against, respond to, and recover from these disasters. To better understand this, we need to consider what happens in the first few hours after a disaster. For those involved, shock and chaos can take place at the scene immediately following the disaster. We have all seen film footage of people in this condition. In many of these events, communications are down or impaired, as well as limited access both into and out of the area. People both directly affected by the disaster and having friends or family in the area are separated from their loved ones, which can create feelings of anxiety and nervousness in regards to that. So as quickly as possible, FEMA does set up relief centers to assist people affected in the area. It is important to cooperate with FEMA and local agencies, giving direction after the disaster. In order to help, some of these steps may be leaving cell and landlines open for emergency workers as much as possible, based upon the limited capacity after disaster has occurred. Next, establish one emergency phone number that FEMA will use to provide to the transferees and or your employees. Communications is the key here. Also, coordinate resources so as to not overlap or overwhelm the area with additional people that may not be needed in those facilities. You want to book rooms at hotels for groups that are already being cared for. When FEMA is involved, use them as the agency to provide information to those who need it most. Communications and information sharing is important after a disaster has occurred. However, in order to keep from tying up the communication lines, follow these guidelines. Use email, text, or social media after the first 24 hours if at all possible. As well, make sure your calls should be made as needed after 72 hours, waiting for the disaster relief teams to get in there and do what they need, especially with the limited communications they will have. Also, you should identify needs of the transferee and then communicate these to a client, to the employer, as well as and as quickly as you can. In addition, in order to help with relief efforts, do not commit suppliers to assist until your client or client approves. So don't book things that you need, such as hotels, committing trucks to the clients unless requested to do so, in order to avoid resources in the area being overloaded. At this time, I would like to turn the presentation over to Heather to continue with today's session. Heather?
Thank you, Matt, and good afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the best way to develop a plan. So one of the first things that you'll want to do in developing an emergency response plan is to form a committee. We've found that it's very important to identify specific individuals in their own area of expertise that can contribute to the group and think through potential obstacles that need to be considered. For instance, you may have home sale experts, household goods experts, and destination service experts. All of these individuals will have value in their input for potential disasters and the best way to be prepared. Next, it'll be important to identify standard operating practices for your plan. Decide what types of emergencies you should prepare for and what the main focal points you will need to have, such as families, household goods, and inventory properties, as well as where you should be prepared to implement your plan. Do you have local, state, national coverage areas? This will be better narrowed down by the client you're preparing the plan for. If your client has an international program, your plan will need to be able to accommodate any potential needs that they may have. You'll also want to identify what exactly your company will be able to support in an emergency. Find out from your client what types of programs and support systems they have set up for their employees. Some corporations may have a human resources group that support immediate needs. If that's the case, it's important to identify what your added value will be. Your support could be in providing temporary accommodations, possibly providing semi-trucks for transporting supplies, or even identifying and holding household goods in storage areas until an area is clear. The last few steps will include your method of contacting your transferees so you don't interfere with other programs, and how you will finance the program. A good example of this would be if your plan is approved for you to always provide temporary accommodations for transferees after an emergency. Do you have direct bills set up with temporary housing providers, or will you have to make payments? Direct bill in an emergency would be an efficient way to arrange housing quickly. Once you feel that you've identified all the points of your emergency plan, compose written standard operating procedures and have your entire committee read, critique, and suggest improvements. When you feel your plan is complete, review with your client. Talk through the last several emergencies you remember nationally, and talk through the plan as to what you would have done if this plan was in place. How would your plan have added value in the situation? When your client feels the plan is ready and has agreed, notify your company the plan is approved and ready to be implemented. In addition to the committee who created the plan, it's a good idea to have additional internal support within your company that assists with the implementation of the plan. For example, you can assign someone to monitor the news and various other outlets that notify you of an emergency, and a dedicated group that will instantly go into action when an emergency is identified. Now that your plan is approved and in place, you're ready to handle your first emergency. It's important to know your priorities when that first emergency happens. Safety should be you and your client's first priority. Disasters can happen close to home as well, so be sure that if a disaster does happen in your area, that your employees are safe. Do they need to evacuate the workplace? Are they equipped to work from a remote location if you need to evacuate? If your workplace is safe, determine if it is also safe for your employees to continue working or if they would be safer at home. It's a good idea to identify an alternate working location for your staff as well as your clients in the event of a disaster. You will want to focus on having the most minimal disruption of relocation activities as possible. If the disaster is in your immediate area, keep in mind that you'll also have relocations going on throughout the nation that will still have a business need to attend for. And transferees may not know that you're impacted by the disaster. Now that your employees and your clients' employees are all safely working, start looking at your transferees and their families. How many transferees and families do you have in the disaster area? Identify those families and start sending messages to them via text message or email, and a request for an immediate response, even if they have not been negatively affected by the disaster. That way, you'll be able to start assessing needs, even if by process of elimination. If you've not heard back from your transferees within 48 hours, pick up the phone and contact them directly. Make a list of needs the transferees and their families have. This could include temporary shelters, housing arrangements, assessing loss of homes, and household goods. When it's safe to get out, also assess vacant homes you have listed as well as inventory homes. Once those needs are assessed, talk to the transferees about a plan to start repairing damages. It'll also be vital to report back all of your findings to the client for their assistance in recovery of the disaster area. This will also be the time to discuss damages to your client's working facilities if found, and the need to move office locations if needed. Once you have identified the emergency and immediate danger and safety of the impacted employees or transferees, as well as assessed your damages, make a list of who all is impacted by the disaster. The list can range from transferees and their families to realtors and other clients. For example, in the recent fires in Colorado, we were able to identify several transferees that were moving to and from the fire area. Once we had identified the transferees, we had to decide if they had already moved, if they were in the process of moving, or if they potentially had family left in the affected area. We were able to determine that one transferee's household goods were en route to the location, and stopping them from being delivered was the best possible solution. The goods went into storage until the area was cleared and the goods could be transferred safely to the home. The relocation policy had a benefit to cover a temporary housing period, so the transferee was able to utilize that benefit built into the policy with no additional cost to the company. Once the area was determined to be safe, the goods were delivered. Another transferee had a home in the same area that burned to the ground. Upon contacting her, we learned that she was already in her new location with a safe place to stay. Although very unfortunate, it was a situation where there was not a need for any temporary housing or other services beyond just consulting her to work with her homeowner's insurance about the fire and damages. Beyond the transferring employees, it's also important to identify if any of these employees are management. Your client will need to know immediately if a member of their management team has been injured or affected by an emergency to the point of them not being able to work or assist others in the emergency. You may need to call a meeting with all available members of management to relay assessments of employees, transferees, and families. Consider calling or emailing your contacts in the affected area as well, so that if you do need storage, temporary accommodations, or temporary office space, they can be ready for your needs. The key to an emergency preparedness plan is communication. It's vital to keep the communication open between you and your client to identify when putting the plan into motion is appropriate. One of the clients we work with has an actual emergency operations center that specifically watches for emergencies that will affect any of their employees as well as facilities they operate. They're great about passing that information on to us so we can cross-reference with our relocation database to see if we have any of their employees in the middle of a relocation into or out of that area. Between keeping that form of communication open to monitoring news, Twitter, Facebook, and various other media outlets, we're always on the lookout for when the next transferee could use our help. As Matt mentioned earlier, we always keep in mind the best method of communicating with the transferees immediately upon learning of an emergency. Since you will want to leave the phone lines open the first 24 to 48 hours after a disaster, the best form of communication may be email or text messaging. Also, post your availability to assist on Facebook and Twitter. You may be surprised how in touch your transferees are with your company during their move. If you've not heard back from them within 48 hours, pick up the phone and call them directly. We have found that occasionally we have a few transferees without the capability of email or text on their personal number, so they weren't aware that we were trying to get a hold of them. The final piece of the communication is in your plan should be to report back the findings to your client. Let them know who all was potentially impacted, who was actually impacted, and which transferees fared well through the disaster and those that require additional assistance. This information will be very important to the success of your plan. Your client will want the list of transferees to follow up with to discuss a plan of action to return to work and the list of resources for long-term help if needed. Now I'm going to actually pass over to Barb, who's going to tell us a little bit more on the emergency response plan. Barb?
Thank you, Heather, and good afternoon, everyone. Moving on, we will now discuss the factors of natural disasters as it relates to the moving process and supplier assistance and needs. One of the most difficult things for a household goods provider to plan for, especially in the busy season, is the natural disasters that can and often do strike without warning. The issues they can cause range from simple service delivery issues all the way to a complete loss. It is also common for natural disasters in one region of the country to cause service delivery issues in another. Some examples, just this year, just recently in mid-July, the heavy rains by Tropical Storm Debbie that poured 18 inches of rain on Florida. We had a household goods crew and driver trying to load a shipment, but they had to stop for safety as well as protection for the customer's property and then start the next day. This, however, made the driver late to his next assignment to load, causing that customer to be delayed in his departure. Another event that happened in late June, as Matt had mentioned earlier, were the fires in Colorado Springs, causing the evacuation of thousands of people, using up all the logistic resources and closing roads. Shipments going to and from Colorado had to be placed in alternate locations. Drivers had to be rerouted around the state and closed roads, causing lost travel time. One driver could not get a required shuttle truck off to offload a shipment for 3 days, delaying the delivery of a shipment. And lastly, another event that we encounter are the heavy snows in the wintertime that can just be frustrating. Drivers are often delayed, if not shut down, when trying to drive from west to east and vice versa. From the north all the way through Colorado and Kansas, heavy snows often delay the ability for drivers to get to the residences and safely deliver shipments. The 2011 snowstorm that hit in the mid-Atlantic states effectively shut down all moving processes for almost a week. When the local highway departments were able to clear the roads, it was only for automobiles, so moving trucks could not operate on the roads without blocking them. Crews could not move the items in or out of homes as the sidewalks and pathways were not clear. These are just some of the ways natural disasters impact the delivery of household goods services. Every day in logistics is a challenge. This is known as the unforeseen challenge that logistic planners fear as every weather report is received. Next, pertaining to home sales. When we are notified of a pending disaster through our CapView system, we are able to generate a list of current homes in inventory, both active and contract pending, with a contact name, phone number, and email. We immediately initiate the email inquiry as to the status for the area and the condition of the home as quickly as possible. However, we do encourage safety for our real estate partners first, their family members, and the communities. If we do not hear back within 48 hours, we do a phone call follow-up for a status, and we do a similar follow-up for homes that are in the acquisition process, working through our real estate community and partners to confirm the security of these homes. This home sale initiative follow-up is the same for both government agencies and corporate clients. Next, pertaining to destination services, upon notification of a pending disaster, we will notify our employee base to check caseloads and current status for each of our transferring families. Should we determine a transferring family are known or potentially known in a disaster area, we would immediately reach out to the family to determine the security of their location and where they are, via by telephone or by email. We would assist on reassigning to a new hotel location if necessary, assistance with an additional rental car if needed, immediate connection to our supplier contacts within the area for additional assistance with our families, assistance with an early return if required, rescheduling of an orientation or a school tour trip, and lastly, assistance with the current status of the area in terms of available utilities, gas, and food. As to our network of suppliers, given the uniqueness of the origination and destination locations for many of our clients, we have pulled together an effective group of real estate suppliers that will assist when called upon. Examples of assistance can be temporary housing, location of shelters, and area storage facilities. Past experience in disaster relief, our primary concern is to secure the property, which may mean boarding up a home for an interim period of time, moving personal property quickly, and even turning an inventory home into a temporary housing arrangement. In closing, there is really no way to know if a disaster is going to disrupt a relocation, but a solid plan can make all the difference. Remember, develop a plan, monitor the news and disaster alert systems, communicate with clients, transferees, and your employees, work with FEMA, and I might interject, you can sign up on an email alert system with FEMA. I know several of us at CapRelo have done that already and utilize that, have been doing that for the past year. Make safety your top priority and utilize your supplier network. I will now turn it back for questions and answers to Julie, and thanks so much.
Yes, thank you, Barb. This is the end of the formal part of the presentation, but we would like to open it up for questions and questions from our audience. So our panelists would be more than happy to field any question that you may have. I want to just serve as a reminder to please type your questions in the Q&A box located in the lower right-hand side of your screen. We have added a few additional experts that will be there to help field some of your questions. Shirley Hockey, Jim Finch, Katie Northrup, and Linda Atkinson are also joining the rest of the panelists here, so we've got a full panel ready to answer anything you may ask. So I think a couple of questions have already started coming in. I'm going to hand this back over to Linda, and she is going to field the questions and make sure that they get into the right person's lap. So Linda, back to you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you. Heather, I think this first question would be best answered by you, and it's what advice should and should not be given to transferees?
Great question. The written and approved plan, I think, should address this, and the advice given should only be in your area of expertise. So if someone is calling you and they have insurance and damage questions, I think that it's best to refer them back to an insurance agent and basically act as a facilitator of the program, but not give advice that you're not comfortable or feel confident giving.
Thank you. Barb, we have a question related to how a plan might be implemented. Can such a program or service be automated, do you think?
Linda, absolutely. And I would recommend to anyone check within your own IT group, but we have set up a system in place already to be able to generate it down to a locational by zip code as far as a disaster that is imminent or getting ready to happen. And by that, we can do a cross-reference within our CapView system.
Thank you. So that relates a little bit to the next question as well. It sounds like if it's an automated system, that will help make it efficient and cost-effective. But what costs might be associated with such a program? Jim Finch, I'd like to ask you this question. What costs might be associated with such a program, and who pays for those costs? Jim, do we have you on the line?
Hello? I'm sorry. Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know if I could be heard. Of course, there are a variety of costs that could apply depending on what the individual client authorizes. So it's very important to make sure that the services and related costs are a part of the written plan and that the client has approved that. For example, temporary housing would certainly be a typical kind of service to provide, both for the service providers and something that a client would most likely be needing and wanting you to provide, even outside of an emergency event of some sort. So just make sure that those are clearly identified and that the client has agreed to limits on the costs, if there are any, to reimbursement procedures and things like that. If there's any particular limit, for example, a client says, you can spend up to, $100 a night on the hotel or whatever. if there are pre-approvals required, then who to go to for that sort of thing when you'd be in an emergency kind of situation. So any of that sort of thing needs to be covered, and then of course there's a kind of an indirect cost with the service itself. That needs to be clearly made a part of the plan so that the client has either agreed to a service type fee in the event of an emergency. They would agree to pay a certain fee, or that could be a part of just general negotiations for overall fee structures.
Thank you. And Heather, I'll ask you this question. We had a good question come in regarding responsibility. We talked a little bit about the role that we play as a service provider. The question is, where does responsibility begin and end with transferees? For example, if a move has been completed, for instance, household goods delivered, all the benefits have been used, then should the provider still reach out to the client or the employee if they know that somebody is in that disaster area?
That's a really interesting question, and kind of how we have been running our emergency plan is based on active relocations. One thing that I do want to note is the people that we've reached out to have been so grateful that we're checking on them. So I think that you could do a similar type of thing. Maybe there's not services that would be offered, but just knowing that the company is watching out for them, that you're concerned, that you recognize they're in the area, and facilitate requests that they may have for assistance, I think would be fine. So I know that currently we kind of look at who's actively relocating, but like I said, I know that a lot of those transferees, even if they've just completed a move, are very, very grateful to hear that we're worried about them.
Excellent. The next question has to do with buyouts and insurance in a damaged home situation. So Barb, I'll direct this to you. If the transferee has accepted a buyout and the home has gone into inventory and the home is damaged, who at this point has the home insurance in their name? The relo company?
Linda, that's a good question. I will tell you, we initiate insurance at time of acceptance and even at time of early equity should there be that case. So if there is damage and there was an accepted buyout, it is our responsibility that we would coordinate with our insurance supplier at that point. Basically what we've done is we'll instruct the agent as far as getting pictures. We do have a pre-authorized dollar limit. I believe it's up to $10,000 as far as getting one estimate, and then over that it'd have to be two estimates. But we try to get it done quickly. A home that has been damaged, though, number one is to have it completely secured, and be it boarded up on the windows, the doors, or whatever.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next question is, are most relo companies giving a lump sum to assist employees in disasters? I'll take that question myself. If so, how much assistance do they give? $5,000, $10,000, etc. The answer to that question really would not be that relocation companies are giving lump sums. Those determinations are made by employee or emergency operations centers on the corporate level, and so that would vary from client to client. We can certainly follow up on that as a post follow-up to do a little research and see what benchmarking is available for that. All right, let me see what other questions that we have coming in here. I think another question is, Jim Finch, I'll address this to you, and we talked about the cost. Another question has come in related to liability of the services that are being provided. So what liability issues do you see associated with having such a program available to our clients?
Well, obviously there are liabilities associated with providing any service, again, whether or not they're emergency, disaster related or not. if the services to be provided are a part of the plan that's been approved by the client, then presumably that they would be minimal, although obviously something like even provision of temporary housing, you need to make sure that, as you would in a normal relocation, that good, safe, sanitary housing is provided. And of course that might be difficult in an emergency situation that was widespread, but if you're doing your normal due diligence in attempting to provide the types of quality of services that are needed, and they've all been pre-approved, then that's probably something should not be a major concern in itself. One of the things I think is important to consider there is that doing nothing could also result in some liability. Not to say that if there were no agreement on the part of a client to provide any services that you would necessarily have any liability, but certainly once you've agreed with a client on services and things to be provided to transferees that have been affected, then you need to make sure that you carry through with those so that you don't get liability from what you don't do any more than for what you do.
Well spoken. Thank you. Does not look like we have any other questions coming in. I'd like to, give folks just a few more seconds and see if we have any more questions from the audience.
Linda, this is Julie. I think I'll take it back. I think it looks like we have covered everything that our audience has asked. At this time, I'd like to thank you, along with Matt and Heather, Barbara, Shirley, and Jim. Sharing your insights today has been great. I'd also like to thank CapRelo for sponsoring today's webinar. And also, on behalf of the Worldwide ERC, we really thank our audience for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this webinar. And at this point, I wish you a very good afternoon, and you may now disconnect. Thank you.